Thank you. Hi everyone, and we'll kind of welcome folks bit by bit when they get on. Thanks for letting us be kind of quote unquote late. There are over 45 people that wanted to be a part of this, which is super, super exciting for what it means as far as Yukoners and those of you that are outside of the Yukon interested in what's happening here. And the kind of conversations were happening at Northlight Innovation between kind of Lana and I and our partners, our funding partners, and now with Rhiza. So the partnership that brought us here is that Brian, who is the picture with the Rhiza Capital, came to speak in Watson Lake a few years ago and connected with the Yukonstruct team back then. And it's been an ongoing relationship, really fueled first and foremost I think by Brian and Rhiza, who is a partner in Rhiza, their passion for the Yukon, just like those of you that are on this call. There's magic, there's a special sauce up here. And partners, so Innovation Entrepreneurship team at the college, sorry, I'm Lauren from the Innovation Entrepreneurship team at the college, which is what you start with when you make introductions. But between us, and partners such as Tech Yukon and obviously Lana with Yukonstruct, we have been for the last many years looking for on how to fill gaps in our ecosystem to be able to support entrepreneurs from that very seedling of an idea all the way through scaling, commercialization, and through scaling. And one of the pieces that we've identified that has been lacking is a culture of investment and then an ability for locals to invest at home in businesses. So Rhiza, via Brian, came up here and started infusing these amazing ideas of what's happening all over the nation and started sharing about what it could look like for us to be in this space and start to do some of this work, which led to, and Lana will talk maybe a little bit more about it, but led to the 3 organizations, plus some help from Government of Yukon, to apply for funding with the McConnell Foundation, which we just received, which will birth what ends up being this project that we're going to talk a little bit more about, and how Yukon can start to get into this investment culture and start to invest locally. So really friendly, open-ended conversation. This is just an intro to what this world that Brian and the team or Brian with Rhiza do every single day, and how we might be able to sink our teeth into it in the Yukon. And the college for the last 11 years has been helping people go from idea all the way to commercialization. And we're really excited to be a part of this because of the gap that it fills in the Yukon to be able to understand on how we can kind of keep money locally and help businesses grow. So I am going to pass it on to Lana, right? Am I passing it on to Lana? Welcome everybody, thanks for being a part of this, and there's a lot of information to come.
Thanks, Lauren. Yes, welcome everyone. I will also just do a few minutes expanding a little bit on what Lauren had said so far and where we've started off from, and really excited to chat today to talk about what is impact investing, what does it look like, what's happening nationally, and what are some things that we can look at and consider what we can do and build and create here in the North. So before we get into all of that, I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about expanded version of how the 3 of us came to be partnered on this conversation today, and why as Yukonstruct we feel like it's really important. And I also always forget to introduce myself. So I am Lana Selby, I'm Executive Director with Yukonstruct, and welcome again, and thanks for joining us today. So our mandate at Yukonstruct is to really help Yukoners bring their ideas and passions to life, and we do that currently through shared space and our community, access to equipment and resources and programming. And for the past few years, as Lauren mentioned, we've really been exploring and having this conversation around the possibility for an impact fund to support entrepreneurs and some of the projects that we see that might need that early stage capital, where government grants or traditional methods of funding, there might be some barriers there, or it might not be quite enough to build a sustainable venture. And we know through many conversations that we've had in the last few years that there is a lack of access to equity-based investment capital in the Yukon, and that there is definitely interest from Yukoners to be able to invest locally as well, and also from foundations and organizations outside of the Yukon that are interested in investing in northern innovation and entrepreneurship. And the creation of a fund could really help to create that opportunity. So one of our key goals as an organization is really to empower entrepreneurs, but we also see the immense value in building a resilient local economy, and one that can weather things like downturns and economic challenges. And as we've been experiencing lately with this pandemic, crisis can really affect a local economy and the local businesses there. And supporting local investors to invest in local ventures just makes sense on so many levels when we're looking at community resilience. So as Lauren did mention, this past year, in partnership with the Yukon College, the Department of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and Rhiza Capital, we were accepted into a really exciting program with the McConnell Foundation. It's called the Solutions Finance Accelerator. And this program has given us the support and the mentorship that we need to be able to actually develop and build out this fund that we've been talking about hypothetically for years. And so our goal is to work with local partners to provide early stage capital. And that it's specifically intended to support initiatives that are working to solve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll go into a little bit further in this presentation. So really focusing on financing enterprises with positive social and environmental impacts. And companies that are out, they're trying to tackle the big challenges that we're facing, especially here in the North. There's so many, like climate change and just sustainability. And really also, I think the cultural piece in building local community resilience, especially in more rural communities. And we need to be investing in businesses that are trying to do this. I think that's really important for all of us to be focusing on, looking at. And there's just tons of opportunity here in the Yukon. We're seeing tech companies that are out to improve the quality of life for people, entrepreneurs here building a resilient local food economy. So much work being done there right now. Cultural entrepreneurship, companies taking on climate change through clean energy solutions. There's a ton happening in the Yukon. And I think the opportunity for us as a community to invest locally in that has just never been better. So I won't go deep into why we think impact investing is so important, because that is also coming later in the presentation. But it's really looking through a lens of positive and measurable social and environmental impact, as well as financial return. And I think both of those things are important and exciting. So in early March, we actually had the opportunity to host the Rhiza team and along with our team here at Yukonstruct and the team at Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We had a lot of conversations here locally with entrepreneurs, with investors, with potential partners about what this fund could look like, and what was needed, both from local businesses and startups and entrepreneurs and investors as well. And we're going to continue to have these conversations. And if you're interested in participating in them, please reach out. And we're also, I want to note that we're really excited to be working with Rhiza, because they manage an impact fund that they grew out of the needs of their community. And here in the Yukon, we face really similar constraints of having a smaller population, and we really need to ensure that we're building something that works for the landscape here in the Yukon and the entrepreneurs and the investors that are here. And just on a final note before I hand it over to Brian, in the last few years, our organization has received just tons of support from our members and the community our many partner organizations and the governments, Canada or federal government, and Yukon government economic development. And that's really enabled us to be a part of building this incredible ecosystem that we're building in the Yukon to support local entrepreneurs and businesses, and to support the innovation and the passion of people that are here, which is really exciting. We're grateful for that. And our goal is to continue to do that, and to continue to do all we can to support the ventures that are really aiming to build a healthy and sustainable and diverse economy here in the Yukon. And I'll just end on the note that, you know, I think a lot of this is about a thriving local economy, but underneath that thriving local economy piece is really about thriving people. And so we're really excited to have this conversation today. Thanks for being here. And I will pass it over to, I believe, Brian. Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, Lana. Thanks, Lauren. And thanks for everybody, to everyone for joining us. Let me do a little bit of quick housekeeping here. There are 34 people on the call, and for those of you on the who are in here as attendees, you can, most of you I've been able to allow, give you the, empower you to be able to talk, and so you can control your own mute or unmute. There's a couple of you who are coming in that I can't, because you have an old version of Zoom. So apologies, but I can't unmute you or give you the power to talk. So I'm sure you have it. And a couple of people are calling in, so I'm mindful that they don't have the slides in front of them, and can offer this much, that we are recording this, and so you'll be able to see it later, or we could always share these slides. For most intents and purposes, the slides aren't all that interesting, and we're going to go over pretty much all of the detail in them, but we can share them if anybody wants them later.
Okay, I'll sign up for one for.
And maybe I could just ask everybody who might have background noise to mute while we spiel through here, but don't be shy about coming on and interrupting us. And I want to encourage anybody who has questions as we go through this to engage with us. This doesn't have to be a one-way informational session. This can be a conversation, because the group, we're not that many. After I do a bit of I'll offer a few slides and a bit of an overview, say something like 10 minutes. I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues at Rhiza, who will offer a bit of different perspectives. Sean Melrose, who you'll see is on the call, is really one of our co-founders of Rhiza, and has been with us right from the beginning as our Chief Investment Officer. So Sean's got a very unique and I think valuable perspective to provide from seeing many applications from potential investee companies, portfolio companies, so social enterprises or impact businesses. Sean does the due diligence and looks at those companies on behalf of our shareholders, and helps us decide, what are good decisions, what are good investments. And then Elise Croston is on the call too with us, who is our Director of Investor Relations, and really works more on the investor side as opposed to Sean working on the investee side. So Elise will offer some perspective of what investors, Rhiza investors, and what investors we interact with across the country are saying and hearing. I'm also mindful that we're all in a weird time with the pandemic, and an economic recession, and things are changing for some of us hourly, or at least daily for most of us. And what we didn't want to do, or aren't doing today, is talking about impact or local investing with that lens on it, but rather with a longer view, that there are always going to be challenges in communities. There are always going to be economic cycles. And investing into land is, I think, a good sort of introduction. We need to take a long view on building our local economies for the sake of resilience in the face of these kinds of.
What's our Shopify? Like
So we're not really touching on that, but we could make some brief comments if anybody wants to ask questions about, what about now, or, how does this apply today? I would encourage anyone to put in questions into the chat, which either Sean or Elise or I will kind of keep an eye on, and we're happy to try and, provide some feedback through the chat if that's where a good question comes from, or we can kind of open it up to more of a discussion. Okay, and then finally, and for those of you who joined a little bit after my earlier thing at the end, I'm going to offer a bit of a poll for everybody to vote on what our next webinar topic might be. So stay tuned at the end for us to get that poll out before you jump off. And we're at 12:24, and I think everybody is probably Zoom, full of Zoom these days. So let's try to aim to be off the call by 1 o'clock, just respecting everybody's time. Okay, a few quick slides. So yes, the partnership, is great. Lots of. I wanted to just quickly introduce, and also I'm mindful that I recognize lots of the names on our attendee group. I'm sure Lana and Lauren do even more so. So some of this might be a little introductory, but one of the intentions, our goals with this webinar was to continue to build familiarity with the local northern population around the idea of local and impact investing. And so that the idea is that as we develop a northern impact fund, that by the time we launch that, everybody will go, yeah, we know about that. Like, where do we send the check? Or I can talk about it with my neighbor, or I can go and introduce a new possible investee company to the process. So some of this, forgive it if it's a little introductory, but I think it'll be valuable. This spectrum.
Brian, sorry to interrupt you, but I think as the host, you have the power to mute anyone who may not realize that they're giving some feedback to the rest of the group. But I think you alone have that power.
I alone have power. While I don't doubt it's hard for me to tell who is making the noise.
Thank you. I think that comment had the desired effect. Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks.
Proceed.
Nice. Okay. So this spectrum. Oh, let me go back. So this spectrum, I think, is important for us all as consumers of investing products, and as entrepreneurs, in building local ecosystems, and as those of us who work in sort of intermediary organizations, whether it's educational institutions or financial institutions or community building organizations like Yukonstruct. I think we need to understand what the investing landscape can look like, and so this spectrum gives us something of a sense of what that what's included. And where we wanted to draw the line. Oh, I should also say, much of the slides that you're going to see today have Rhiza branding on them and some of the Rhiza colors and whatnot. But I want to be clear that we're not proposing, nor Rhiza, nor Yukonstruct, nor Yukon College are proposing just coming in and plunking down another Rhiza in the north. What I think the three partners are trying to do is design something that is very appropriate for a northern Yukon kind of context, and Rhiza is simply one partner in it. So forgive the fact that there is maybe a little bit too much Rhiza branding. Just take it with a grain of salt that we're just offering it as perspective and kind of from an informational perspective. We're not trying to sell anybody on do Rhiza, as if that's their only choice. And then, speaking of choice, this spectrum gives you a sense where we are interested. And I think I speak for Yukonstruct and Yukon College is really in this farther right section around impact investing. And not so much the stuff on the left side of the spectrum around traditional investing or responsible investing or even socially responsible investing. And frankly, I think that's because this isn't good enough. Responsible investing and socially responsible investing and negative screens have been around actually for probably more than a decade, probably, maybe as much as 2 decades. And we still have major problems not being financed. We know what solutions are. We know that there are solutions to significant issues, and they're still undercapitalized. So that's why I think we're trying to look at building these place-based funds with an eye to driving the capital towards the solutions and making sure that it works. Now, even within the impact investing section of this spectrum, there is some diversity. everything from sort of finance first, which is really very much about we need to make money with a return on investment, and secondarily, if there's there can be a social or environmental positive, return as well. Over to community investing, which can actually include losing money, losing capital. So for example, a philanthropic organization that becomes an impact investor says it's okay that you only pay back 80% of what we've invested, because we see that 20% that we quote unquote lost is offset by the community value, by the social or environmental positive return. So some investors are open to, what might be called concessionary investing. Other investors are like, nope, that's my nest egg and I don't want to lose any money on it, and I want market-based returns. So even within the impact investing sort of scene, there are options. And what we are trying to work on building and designing in the North is something that can actually encompass a number of these three sections, three types of impact investing. We won't today get into the details or the nuance of the exact Northern Fund model, but suffice it to say, we are interested in supporting, for example, nonprofit organizations that want to build social enterprises that have, really big community benefits, but may not be financially viable unto themselves. And we also want to invest in businesses that are, let's say tech-based, highly scalable, massive, even global marketplaces to sell their product or service, and therefore providing the potential of a really big financial return to investors. So there's a whole number of options, and Sean will speak a little bit about our portfolio strategy. But suffice it to say, that portfolio of investments can range across impact as well. Okay. And Elise, just for your information, I'm not watching the chat right now, so flag me down if I need to pause.
Will do. Yeah, all good.
Thanks. So I wanted to share a couple of comments in sharing some of these examples of impact, what I'll call them is impact intermediaries or impact funds that exist in Canada. The truth is, there's quite a few. It's not like a mature marketplace, for example, wealth management organizations, where there's probably literally thousands of them. Impact funds are just getting going. The oldest of these impact funds listed here is like Renewal, which might be, I don't know, 12 years old, or maybe 14 years old. So that just gives you a sense that this is a burgeoning marketplace of investment offerings. And so as investors, we look and we say, well, I could go with like long-standing, government bonds or blue chips, stock and trade that I know what it's going to do. I can see the history. Or we can say as investors, well, I want to look for something new, something more innovative, something more impactful. And what you'll find is a group of investment opportunities that have lots of diversity, have lots of range, and none of which have long track records. And that isn't to say that it's bad, but we have to be mindful that it's fairly early in the developmental stages of building the impact investing marketplace. Let me just touch on a few of these examples, and I encourage you to, if you really want to dig into this, obviously some Googling can find other examples other than these ones, but we wanted to include these ones because they are really interesting and they're also quite diverse. Knives and Forks is an example that I'll quickly characterize as a co-op. I mean, it is a co-op. And not unlike other co-ops, it has members. And in fact, the members are the investors. So Knives and Forks is an example. We also have an investment co-op on the Sunshine Coast. And just in very simple terms, as a member, in fact, I'm a member of our Sunshine Coast investment co-op. Our family put in $2,500 to buy a share in that co-op. And so did 100 other people. And that $250,000 then becomes investable capital that the co-op goes out and invests in local businesses, and those local businesses use that capital to grow and provide community benefit, economic, social, environmental or a mix thereof. So the co-op model is one version. You know, on the other end of scale, like in terms of size, is probably Renewal Funds. There's now 4 Renewal Funds. Renewal 4 is the most recent one. And maybe I'm going to need some help from Elise, who actually used to work at Renewal, but I think it adds up to about $250 million in total across the 4 funds.
Correct.
Something like that. And so Renewal Funds is probably the biggest one in Canada doing true impact. And they are invested in, and I'm gonna sort of grossly oversimplify this, but let's call it food, ag tech, food, and those types of businesses, and doing very well. You know, performance on their early funds is very positive for their investors. And they have provided leadership in terms of building more and more confidence with investors that investing in impact is a good idea. It's a good idea from both a financial perspective and a good idea for our earth and our, you know, and people and so on. And then just staying on a very quick sort of food kind of theme, Fair Finance Fund is in Southern Ontario, and they essentially do, and I'm going to, again, grossly oversimplify, but they do small loans to food and food processing small businesses. And the loans are particularly valuable because that can be a difficult business sector to finance because of all the risks around farming, including, you know, weather and pests and labor and then low margins on food, and so it can be a difficult one to finance, and that's why Fair Finance Fund said, you know, food's critical, and we need to figure out new financing tools to allow for investors to support the local food economy. And then, you know, sort of jumping around over here to Raven Indigenous Capital Partners. Raven is actually quite similar to Rhiza Capital in that they almost solely focus on providing equity financing. The key difference or you know, focus that they have is obviously on Indigenous-owned enterprises that they invest into. So I think they're raised at something like $4 or $5 million and are invested in at this point, I think, something like 6 or 8 businesses, and they are across Canada and doing, I think, what is really important work in providing leadership and providing the opportunity for investors from across Canada to engage in advancing the Indigenous economy and businesses thereof. And then finally, I'll just add on, and this isn't exactly an intermediary, but the Sunshine Coast Credit Union, which by the way is a part owner of Rhiza Capital, we built a tool, essentially a term deposit. So just like when any of us walk into our banking institution and we say, hey, I have $5,000 or I have $10,000, I want to put it into a very safe product that has a market-based return and some assurance of safety. For example, a guarantee that my money will be there, at maturity and with a 3% return or 2% return annually. So what we did was with our credit union, we built the impactful term deposit. And so just like, probably all of us have savings products like that at our financial institutions, people on the Sunshine Coast now can walk in and say, I want to put $5,000 into the impactful term deposit. I look forward to getting my, and it's a very market-based return. I think it's at 2.5% per annum right now. Annual liquidity, so it means I can take the money out at the end of each of the 5-year maturity term years and put it into something else if I want to. And once the money is deposited, the credit union turned around and put a portion of that deposit capital into Rhiza Capital's impact investing portfolio. So this is a way for local financial institutions to work with customers in a very risk savvy profile to advanced investing in a local economy. Okay, those are some of the examples of impact intermediaries across the country. We can get into more details about any of them, perhaps in a future session, if anybody would like to. And there are more out there that we could also talk about. wanted to share this slide, and obviously this is very much about Rhiza's approach. We are now 6.5 years old, and have learned from both our successes and our mistakes. And the model that we built on the Sunshine Coast, we wanted to share it in this webinar because in some ways it indicates what's possible in the north, in the Yukon, or arguably across the north. And it shows a few different things. So bear with me as I just sort of talk through some of the characteristics of what we have as our impact, if you will, finance ecosystem on the Sunshine Coast. As I mentioned earlier, one of the first things we developed was, these didn't necessarily develop in this order, but an investment co-op. So as I mentioned, it's a member-governed community investment, and it's very much about impact first investment portfolio. So the investments we have in the investment cooperative. So a couple of thoughts. First, on the investor side, very low buy-in. I mean, so to speak, $2,500 is affordable for many of us who can afford to do investing, and relatively modest risk, which is largely mitigated by I'm investing in my own community. So I know what that business is. I probably even know who those people are, and I know I can go buy from that business that I'm now invested in. So there's a sort of self-reinforcing risk mitigation structure to an investment co-op because it's so localized and place-based. And where we wanted to gear our investment co-op was towards the really difficult to finance, high community benefit kind of deals. So we looked for things like childcares or community gardens or car co-ops, or we did a deal, I'll share a slide in a moment, with a majority indigenous owned composting facility on a former mine site that hires well over 50% of their employees from young First Nations people who really have little, if any, access to a traditional job market. So that's a very much social enterprise kind of investment. Moving into the middle, we developed one that's called a community investment corporation, and it really is just like a business that we sell shares to investors in, so they invest into the CIC, and then we use their capital that they invested into the CIC to invest into a portfolio of other businesses. And so as you can see on the bottom, it says a regional blended impact investment portfolio. So we invest, I think we're in about 8 or 9 businesses right now. And they range, it includes like a climbing gym and a hardware store and a number of other, I'll characterize them, some of the language we use is around sort of Main Street businesses that we know are in almost every community and are a bit of the small business pillars of strength that, local economies are built on. That's who we try to help support with that portfolio. And then moving over to the right is the Venture Capital Corp model. We've in fact launched 3 different venture capitals. We're on our 3rd one now, Venture Capital Corp. And this for Rhiza has been provincially focused. So it's not just the Sunshine Coast. And the reason why we wanted to open it up to all of British Columbia, and I think this is an important aspect for as we develop the fund in the north, is there just isn't enough venture capital grade investments on the Sunshine Coast. So we're an economy, not unlike the Yukon, of about 30,000 people total. And so there just isn't going to be a lot of tech economy. So we needed to look at the rest of BC to fill out a portfolio that was well-rounded and robust with lots of, or sufficient number of transactions to ensure that the portfolio theory works, so that investors are protected by being invested in a number of different companies instead of just being reliant on 1 or 2 that everybody crosses their fingers. So the Venture Capital Corp, we, as you can see in the green box, we have a tax credit in BC, which is very much geared around venture capital. We are some of you may be wondering, okay, so there's the small business tax credit in the Yukon, and how is that going to be relevant or not relevant to what we develop in the north? Short answer is, or at least the evasive answer I'll give right now to your internal question is, we're not sure yet. We've only started to sort of dig into the applicability from a local investing, but certainly those of you in the North know the stories of Air North and probably some others that have used that tax credit to help capitalize their business. And so there is a possibility that that tax credit is applicable in the same way that we've used it in BC. Okay, I think I'm going to move on, but I wanted to share that spectrum of different kinds of local investing vehicles or local investing funds that can be of value. And in a moment, I'm going to hand this over to Sean, but you know, just this is the Sailor Soils story or example that I wanted to offer. By the way, both the investment co-op and the CIC have invested into Sailor Soils. And the reason is because within each of those funds mandates, this social enterprise just fits. You know, it's meeting a big social need in terms of employment for young Indigenous people. It's meeting an environmental need in terms of taking backyard waste, fish farm waste, and construction waste and turning it into compost, which then can be used to, you know, build our ability on local farms. So it's contributing to the food systems as well. What's particularly, I think, brilliant and inspiring about Sailor Soils and what Aaron Joe is the principal founder behind it, did was they built Sailor Soils, a composting facility on a former mine site. And so this is seashelled Indian band land that was leased to an aggregate mining company for many years. After aggregate mining is done on that land, it's basically useless land. There's no arability left. And so, you know, the First Nations, the Seychelles First Nations asked themselves, well, this is our land. Like, what's our long view for this? Are we just going to leave it in sort of sediment ponds and, you know, ugly rock cliff? And Aaron's response was, no, you know what, let's rebuild this. Let's build compost, sell that, and also begin to build the arability of that former mine site. So it's meeting just so many layers of both financial return as well as social and environmental return on our investment that we're really proud to have them. And you'll see at the top corner an indication of 2 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that they are aligned with. And that, I think, is where I'm going to hand it over to Sean to carry on.
Not a bad segue, Brian. So hi, I'm Sean Melrose, co-founder of Rhiza Capital and Chief Investment Officer, which means I have the privilege of getting to meet face-to-face with hundreds of entrepreneurs as they pitch me and I discuss with them how we can work together to help them do the good work they're doing and have our investors share in that experience. Now we're on to the SDG Align Impact slide. I want to sort of walk right back a bit. Brian had the opportunity during his talk to talk a lot about impact. So I want to do a little bit of 101 on sort of what are we speaking about when we speak about impact. I think there are some people on this call that are deeply sort of mired in it. They're drinking deeply the impact Kool-Aid, and others are saying, oh, not another acronym. So let me sort of quickly buzz through that and pick us up. And what I really want to get to is, how does impact investing and community-based investing relate? Because you're all sitting there in your community, and now we're speaking about impact and what is the connection. I think Brian has already set up some of that, but let's walk through it. So first of all, the United Nations SDGs is the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are 17 goals to transform the world by 2030. So what is the benefit of speaking about the SDGs or having them in your mind? And to my mind, it comes down to common vocabulary. We can't even talk about impact until we agree on what the terms are. So these 17 goals provide us with some common vocabulary and an agreement around how we're going to measure them. So underneath the hood, there is some detail as to what are the metrics we'll follow to determine whether or not we've actually moved the needle on poverty or the gender equality or education or. But writ large, this feels very sort of policy-like. And as you read around the ring, peace and justice, good health and well-being, quality education, and decent work, something that comes to mind that I think brings it home, hits it, takes it from sort of the ivory tower to Main Street, is Robert Fullam's Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Because honestly, when you start reading our way through the Sustainable Development Goals, what I hear in my head is, Rob's share, play fair, don't hit people, put things back where you found them, clean up your own mess. Sounds environmental to me. Don't take things that aren't yours. And my favorite, take a nap every afternoon. Now, there is no SDG tied to napping, but maybe we can advocate for an 18th. So it really is about taking care of yourselves, taking care of other people, treating other people like they're your family. And suddenly now this is all mother and apple pie. So the SDGs, which sound like 17 abstractions, really come down to the things that your mother taught you. And that's really Rhiza's view on the SDGs, is how does this theoretical framework hit Main Street and hit your community? So I want to try to another quote to help me make that bridge, because it may feel like this is the level where governments are participating, large organizations are participating. This has a multinational feel to it, but it's not. And so I'll invoke Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has. My take on this is that impact starts in community. This is not the last place it trickles down to. This is where it actually starts. And the tighter knit the community, the easier impact is to achieve. So that's my reasonably rough segue from SDGs and why it matters in your backyard. Now, our approach, as Brian laid out, was in our home community. It started on the Sunshine Coast, and honestly strengthened our community by investing in our neighbors and their businesses. Started before we ever even discussed the SDGs internally at Rhiza. But once we applied that lens, we saw that everything we'd been doing along the way, everything we'd been investing in along the way, had been SDG driven. We just hadn't been using that particular lens intentionally. But the moment we did use that lens, both retroactively and going forward, all it did was made everything clearer. Clearer about the good work being done by the entrepreneurs we supported, clearer about who we should be supporting next. So that's how the SDGs became a tool in our hands to, first of all, do community-based investing and then beyond. And if someone can move on to the next slide. Lens-wise, we've continued to add additional perspectives, including gender-based lenses, reconciliation lens with regards to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and just transition perspectives, which is really about supporting economic diversity beyond, in support of clean energy transition. And certainly I'm sensitive to the fact that I'm sitting in Edmonton, Alberta right now, so neck deep in oil country and you're deep in mining country. So natural resources are a reality in Canada. So that is not about, again, occasionally you'll run into perspectives that natural resources are necessarily in conflict with an impact thesis, and I don't happen to subscribe to that view. I think there is a position in this just transition perspective where you can marry them. So with successful, tripping over my own tongue. So my take is that successful community-based investing and impact investing is rooted in the same principles of successful investing in general. And this is where I'd like to go on to our next slide, about how we're going about trying to invest successfully, whether it be with an impact and community lens or just in general. So it comes down to, again, some mother and apple pie from an investment perspective. You want to minimize risk. You want to pursue upside, you want to make strong decisions. It's what you do every day, it's what we do every day. It is the way every individual and every organization should be approaching investing. Minimizing risk, I don't want to say maximizing upside, it's a pursuit of upside and then making strong decisions. So I want to walk a little bit through this to talk about how there are a lot of players and a lot of responsibilities to be carried in each of these layers. So on
Sean. Yes, Sean. Sorry. While I find this super interesting, I'm conscious. Well, I'm conscious it's 12:53, and want to give Elise a chance, and then maybe a little bit of time for back and forth. So
yeah, most certainly. And so I can, what I can do actually is take this to our example, because all of this, everything I was going to add here plays out in our example. So on our next and last slide for me, until we hand it over to the eloquent Elise, is this. So what are we trying to do to minimize risk, maximize upside, and make strong decisions? Well, one of the ways in which we can minimize risk is making sure that we have multiple stakeholders at the table. There's something to be said within a given community for having all the people who are stakeholders in that community at the table in an investing process, whether it be government, foundations, wealthy and successful families, and then community members. The way in which those participants all being under the same tent minimizes the risk for the community is that government institutional investors, they're at the table because it's directly aligned with their mandate to make sure that community-based businesses are successful and doing well. That's really what they're there to do. Their special capacity, the ability to bear risk. Where the foundations, the 30% in the upper left, they're at the table because they're mission focused and they want to achieve certain impact outcomes in the community. So where the government is more focused on economic development, foundations often mission, so that's where impact investing marries the two. They have the unique capacity to be patient. This is multi-generational endowment money. Wealthy and successful families, they have the bankroll, they have the capacity to be generous, where the others are bearing risk and patient, because effectively their motivation is to pay forward the success that the community itself has delivered to them. They're wealthy and successful because historically the community has delivered success to their family through their businesses, getting a chance to turn it back around. And lastly, the community members, the broad array of community members, which in this particular pie chart is referenced as non-accredited. What's their role? Well, they're at the table because, and they're interested because they want to build a thriving and resilient community because it's the one they live in, mutually assuring the success of their neighbors and their community's businesses. And their unique capacity is to choose the community they wish to live in by voting with their day-to-day spending, their day-to-day saving, and their day-to-day investing. So that is one of their risk mitigation approaches. And then of course, on the right-hand side, another way to mitigate risk when you're investing either in impact or community or both is to ensure that you're investing along the life cycle of businesses in any community, including the Yukon. You have brand new businesses that need seed funding. You have businesses that have spun up the flywheel and now are ready to start exporting products. So exporting stuff and importing capital to your region, that's growth. And then either follow on or succession planning. You have some fantastic businesses that have been built up and want to be carried for another 30 years in the hands of other owners, if only there were the available capital. And so whether follow on, helping growth companies become bigger, or that tranche of capital helping to transition a company that otherwise would be sold off for parts for lack of a buyer or a well-financed buyer, we recognize that one of the ways in which Rhiza's risk mitigation approach is to be investing all the way along the life cycle of businesses. So they're not particularly weighted in early stage or mid or later, because we include them all. So multi-stakeholders in the community, investing all the way through a business's life cycle. These are some of the ways in which we approach managing our portfolio, again, by using strong governance, strong decision-making, and a strong governance and decision-making, and using fairly straightforward investment approaches. And I think that wraps me up there. I will add an asterisk because there was a question specifically about accredited investors, non-accredited, and how do you go about accessing this? That I think we have the capacity to and have historically shown that we can design funds and design products so they fit the mandates of each of those stakeholders. You have a different approach and provide a different financial instrument to the institution versus the foundation. And again, there are tools that can be invested in directly by non-accredited investors, and that is also one of the tools in our toolkit. So we want to make sure that every stakeholder has some way to be at the table. So with this, I'll pass it on to Elise.
Thanks, everyone. And so I'm very aware of the time and want to be respectful of everyone's lunch hour or however you're joining us. And I think that's addressing the questions that came through the chat. There are gaps to accessibility, and for many of the funds that were featured on that logo array, you do have to be an accredited investor, and also the minimum commitment is quite prohibitory. But I want to bring it back even just beyond being a venture investor and committing large sums of money over a long arc. COVID, I think, has really put into perspective the impact and the importance of what's local. And so, even broadening your investment thesis to how are you spending your money, supporting local businesses, and therefore like investing in their growth in a way. Where is your capital being held? Brian mentioned that we are partially owned by a credit union and are very strong advocates for credit unions across the country. They are the old school impact investors. credit unions. And so, but one of the things I want to, as this was a how-to email, sorry, or webinar, yes? Oh, how to, so go and press those that have influence over your money. Ask important questions. What is this being invested in? What types of businesses are being supported? And if you're not satisfied with those answers, then push them harder. We're working with Lana and Lauren and our partners across the Yukon to create more accessible products for everyone on this call and beyond. But there are more things that we can do to push the sector. And so beyond pushing your investment advisors or managers, look at where your philanthropic dollars are being directed, and look into where those foundations or charities are invested themselves. One of the things that brought me personally into the sector was I was working for an environmental law charity, and then looked at my personal finances, and I was invested in the things that I was fighting every day. And so, we as individuals have the opportunity to align our capital with our values, but we also need to push the institutions that are working on important issues to also be invested in them with their dollars. So please, I think there's a few things in the chat that came up. I hope we just addressed them. And I would like to open it to Lana or Lauren, who are more familiar with regulatory environments within the Yukon regarding financial institutions or cooperatives. If you want to add any commentary to those questions that came in. And please also, you'll see the poll popping up. Don't be shy. We want, this is meant to be a conversation and to facilitate important work going forward. So knowing that, there are inaccessible things but are desired, and there's the market for them. That's things that we need to know, because Lana, Lauren, Brian, Sean, we're all working to create those access points so that we can have a significant impact in the Yukon and across country.
Thanks, Elise. And if anybody has something you would really like us to do a session on or learn more about, but it's not on the poll, quickly shoot it into the chat so that we can kind of think about it and see where it fits in elsewhere. And Lana, are you closing us out, or Lauren, are you closing us out? I'll just say thanks, everyone, and apologies for us running a little long here. And look forward to connecting with many of you soon. Lauren, looks like you.
Same. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, team. Rhiza, Lana, follow me up on this. Thank you. I notes to kind of recap. We don't have time for the notes, but the fact that Team Rhiza is jumping into bed with the Yukon and creating a custom-made, working with us to create a custom-made space from their expertise doing this across the nation is really awesome. And thanks to Government of Yukon as well for supporting the fact that we are able to do this work with Rhiza and do this work with McConnell. We couldn't do it without you guys, so thank you. I'm going to leave my email address in the chat if anybody wants to email, and Alana, I'll put yours in there too while you're closing up so that those questions that weren't answered, we can answer them for you on the back end. Everybody, thank you.
Yeah, my only add-on is another thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us, and yeah, thanks Lauren for putting my info in there too, and obviously reach out to either of us. And I think there was a slide with contact info, but maybe we can put in Rhiza's as well if anyone needs it. But definitely reach out and let us know what other questions or what other topics, because it's really important. We want to have more of these conversations. So thanks for joining us today. And yeah, I think that's all for me. If there's anything from anyone else.
Right on. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank everybody voted, so many thanks.
Yeah,
and
great.
Talk to you all soon.
That's awesome. Thanks, everybody.
I'll send out the recording. There's a couple of people have asked. I'll send up a follow-up with everyone's contact, the recording, and perhaps the results of the poll and what next steps are. So all of these extra threads that are in the chat, I look forward to wrapping them all up with an email to everyone.
Thanks, Elise, for
Cheers.